On our planet, there are diverse cultures. Some are more similar to ours, while others are even frightening, such as, for example, those of isolated tribes, which can be violent toward outsiders, capable of committing horrendous acts such as cannibalism. However, the law prohibiting contact with these tribes is not always respected, resulting in episodes worthy of a horror film. In the year 2017, presenter Reza Aslan of the CNN television network decided to go further to show the audience one of India's most extreme sects, known as the Agori. The group lives on the banks of the Ganges River in India, rejects the caste system, and performs rituals involving human remains, including their consumption. During the filming of the program Believer, Aslan agreed to participate in the rituals. First, he bathed in the Ganges River, considered sacred by Hindus. Next, a sect member blew human ashes onto his face. At that point, he was already completely out of his comfort zone. But what came next was even more bizarre. As part of the ceremonial banquet, Aslan sampled a piece of cooked human brain. According to him, it tasted like charcoal. That remark did not please the hosts. One of the Agori was so offended that he took feces from his own clothing, ate a piece, and then threw the rest at Aslan and the camera operator. It was at that moment that Aslan realized he might be in danger of losing his life, so he decided to stop commenting and simply observe until they could find a chance to escape. The report sparked controversy, both because of the shocking images and the criticism that the sect represented an extreme minority and should not have been treated as a symbol of the Hindu faith. But despite the criticism, we must acknowledge that this reporter was very courageous, or perhaps very reckless, in doing all of this with these people. In the year 1961, young Michael Rockefeller, heir to one of the wealthiest families in the United States of America, disappeared off the coast of Papua New Guinea and was never seen again. He was 23 years old, the son of New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller, and was in the country as an explorer and researcher of the local tribes, especially the Asmat, known for their art and also for reports of cannibalistic rituals. It all began when the canoe in which he and a Dutch anthropologist were traveling capsized about 19 kilometers off the coast. Without assistance, Michael is said to have declared, "I think I can make it," and jumped into the water. He was never seen again. His colleague was rescued the next day. Michael was not. The official theory is that he drowned. However, over the decades, increasingly dark rumors have arisen. Investigations by journalists, anthropologists, and even a book published in 2014 suggest that he may have reached shore and been killed in retaliation, because years earlier Dutch soldiers had attacked the village of Otstjonep, and the Asmat believed in an eye-for-an-eye justice. Residents of the region went so far as to report that Michael was captured and served in a ritual. One of them reportedly said that it was a dangerous story. If you told it, you might be killed yourself. His family never confirmed anything, so only assumptions, theories, and a story that to this day raises more questions than answers remain. American John Allen Chow had a bold objective: to reach the most isolated and hostile tribe on the planet. In November of 2018, he paid fishermen to take him to North Sentinel Island in the Indian Ocean, intending to preach Christianity to the indigenous people who had lived there for more than 60,000 years without contact with the outside world. The problem is that visiting that island is illegal, precisely to protect the natives from common diseases such as influenza or measles, to which they have no immunity. Nonetheless, Chow ignored the warnings and went there with a Bible, gifts, and great enthusiasm. On first contact, he was met with arrows. One even pierced the Bible he carried against his chest. Still, he insisted. The next day, he returned to the island and this time did not leave. Fishermen who followed at a distance saw the natives dragging and burying his body in the sand. His case made headlines around the world and raised discussions about how far faith can go and at what point it crosses common sense. Chow's body was never recovered, and the tribe, as always, continues refusing any form of contact. To this day, no one has managed to set foot there without being attacked. In the year 2011, a forest ranger was struck by an arrow in the back while working in a national park in Peru. He had approached too closely to an isolated Amazonian tribe. The attack was not exactly an attack. The arrow had no tip, it was a warning. Even so, the ranger required medical attention. Luckily, he recovered well, but the message that that territory has an owner and that they do not want visitors was made very clear. These isolated tribes live under constant threat of invasion, mainly because of gas and oil exploitation in the region. Over the past 20 years, encounters with such groups have become more frequent, which worries scientists, environmentalists, and the Peruvian government itself. The risk is not only for those who approach. For the indigenous people, contact with outsiders can be devastating. Diseases common to us can decimate entire communities that have no immunity. For this reason, authorities have reinforced warnings not to get close. In some cases, the government is even considering creating new laws to protect these territories and avoid further conflicts. It is a tense situation. On one side, people trying to preserve their way of life. On the other, a world that insists on invading. And, amid it all, that warning in the form of a tipless arrow may be the last resort to maintain distance. One of the most extreme cases involving isolated tribes occurred in 2006 on the famed North Sentinel Island in the Indian Ocean. Two Indian fishermen, Sundar Raj, 48 years old, and Pandit Tiwari, 52 years old, ended up dead after the boat on which they were sleeping was carried by the tide to the island, inhabited by one of the last human groups living completely isolated from the modern world. They were fishing illegally in the area, anchored the boat with a stone tied to a rope, and, according to colleagues, drank so much that they did not wake even when warned of the danger. The boat drifted overnight and at dawn came too close to the shore. That was when the island's inhabitants attacked. The attempt to recover the bodies by helicopter also failed. The aircraft was met with a shower of arrows. Even so, the rotor wash revealed the fishermen's remains buried nearby, debunking a local rumor that they had been eaten. Despite pressure for a new operation, authorities and environmentalists argued for a retreat. The island has a 5-kilometer exclusion zone precisely to avoid this type of conflict. Contact with tribes like this is not only dangerous but can be fatal for them, as they have no immunity to diseases common elsewhere. Perhaps the best course is to leave the Sentinelese in peace. In the dense forests of West Papua, the Cororowai live, one of the last peoples with records of cannibalism. Until the 1960s, they practiced rituals involving the consumption of other tribe members, but not out of hunger. It was a matter of justice, or rather, of revenge. When someone was accused of witchcraft, the group believed that eliminating the alleged witch would help protect the community. In 2006, a television crew made rare direct contact with the Cororowai. One tribe member even proudly showed the skull of a man who had been killed for being a witch. According to them, everything except teeth, hair, and nails was used. Traveler Drew Binsky visited the Cororowai in 2020. It was a true journey, with 4 flights, hours of trekking through the jungle, and days isolated from the world to reach them. He was received with surprise and curiosity. For many there, it was their first time seeing an outsider. During the visit, the locals reported that cannibalism is now almost extinct, but that their parents still practiced it. Despite changes imposed by the Indonesian government, such as efforts to relocate these tribes to civilized villages, the Cororowai still resist in the heart of the forest, keeping alive traditions that seem pulled from another era. A resident of the village of Shipetiari, in an isolated region of the Peruvian Amazon, was struck by an arrow in 2015 and did not survive. The attack came from members of the Mashkopiro tribe, an indigenous group considered isolated, which avoids contact with the outside world. The Mashkopiro live in constant movement through the forest in small groups, and they began to be seen more frequently starting in 2011. Since then, sightings have increased, usually along riverbanks where they look for food such as turtle eggs. According to experts, the attacks do not appear premeditated. The tribe may approach in search of tools or food. In recent years, however, the situation has worsened. The presence of logging companies in the Madre de Dios region in southern Peru has pushed these peoples further out of their territory. Recent videos show tribe members emerging from the forest famished and attempting to interact with nearby communities. The Peruvian government prohibits this type of approach but cannot always prevent it. In the year 1839, British missionary John Williams decided to take his faith to a little-known region of the South Pacific called Erromango Island, now part of Vanuatu. Williams was already experienced, having spent more than 20 years traveling among the Polynesian islands, learning local languages, and converting entire communities to Christianity. But that year, he went too far. Together with another missionary, James Harris, Williams landed on Erromango, not knowing that its inhabitants had never had contact with foreigners. And the reception was brutal. The two were killed soon after arriving, and according to contemporary accounts, their remains were served in a cannibalistic ritual. The news shocked Europe, especially religious circles where Williams was seen as a hero of faith. Even so, the mission continued, and years later, Erromango Island was evangelized. More than 170 years later, in 2009, descendants of the island's inhabitants organized a formal apology ceremony for Williams's family. The gesture was symbolic but marked reconciliation between two worlds that in 1839 had met in the worst possible way. As part of the homage, the village where it all happened was renamed Williams Bay. During a hike along the famous Kakakota Trail in Papua New Guinea, the couple Matthew Iovane and Michelle Clemens experienced a terrible and hard-to-believe ordeal. They were on the last day of the trail when they were ambushed by two men armed with spears and axes, wearing war paint. It happened deep in the forest, far from any sign of civilization. Unable to understand the language of their assailants, and with the situation spiraling out of control, Matthew and Michelle surrendered everything: backpacks, money, and even their clothes. But that was not enough. According to the couple's account, Matthew was blindfolded with his own t-shirt and tied to a tree. Michelle had her fingers injured when they tried to remove her jewelry. They said they were threatened and believed they would be killed or even devoured. After about an hour, they managed to escape, but the flight was another trial. They ran barefoot through the jungle, suffered burns from poisonous plants, and were pursued by dogs. Injured and disoriented, they found help in a nearby village. The British consulate was alerted and a helicopter carried out the rescue. However, the case divided opinions. Local residents and experienced guides questioned several aspects of the story, such as the existence of wild dogs in the region and whether the tale was fictitious, created just to attract attention. Even so, the episode raised discussions about the risks of adventures in remote areas and where the pursuit of adrenaline ends and pure despair begins. In July of 2019, residents of two remote villages in Papua New Guinea awoke to chaos. First, it was Munima, where 7 people were killed on a Sunday. The next day, the target was Karita, and the attack left at least 16 dead, most of them women and children, including 2 who were pregnant. The massacre began before dawn. According to witnesses, the attackers used firearms and machetes to invade homes and assault anyone inside. A local health worker reported that he ran into the bush upon hearing the gunfire and only returned hours later, when the village was already destroyed. What he found was devastating: burned houses and neighbors' bodies unrecognizable, many of them mutilated. The suspicion is that the attacks were motivated by an old dispute between local tribes, aggravated by a previous assault. Some residents believe the trigger was support offered by Karita to victims of another recent confrontation. Although tribal conflicts have been part of the reality in this region for decades, the Karita Massacre shocked even those who have seen much. Community leaders said that not even the old rules of clan warfare, which customarily spared women and children, were respected. The Prime Minister at the time, James Marape, promised to hunt down those responsible but failed to bring them to justice. Meanwhile, hundreds of families remained hidden in the bush, fearful that the violence might continue. Don't forget to subscribe so you can watch more videos like this.